All right, Job chapter 6. Let's call this one Chipping Away at Truth. As we're going to see in this chapter, even though Job is going to disagree with Eliphaz's accusations, they're going to be on the same page about a fundamental misconception we saw planted, potentially planted at least in Job's mind back in chapter 1, and that is this is from God. Understanding that the servant who brought word that his sheep were destroyed, he said they were destroyed by fire of God. And Job is going to seem to pick up on something similar in this chapter when it reads in verse 4 roundabout. For the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks their poison. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. And if you have walked with God for very long or believed or trusted in God for very long, you have probably endured periods of isolation where you felt personally isolated from people, but to the degree you were still able to trust that God still cared for you, that still gave you a certain level of confidence or comfort that Job doesn't have here, because not only have we seen his wife so overcome with grief that she can't really be a source of strength for him. His friends have already begun with Eliphaz to become a disappointment. And now it's clear that he believes that God has turned on him, which probably should make it no surprise that in the next few verses, he is actually just going to ask God to die. Why? How do we know? Because by the time we get to verse 8, it's going to say, oh, that I might have my request and that God would fulfill my hope, that it would please God to crush me, that he would let loose his hand and cut me off. A term that's often used in Israel, even under the law, for simply executing people that had to be cut off from among the people of Israel. So it seems that Job is using the term in that same way now, asking for death. And if it's not clear there, it's going to seem to be clear all the way down through verse 13. However, it should not surprise us that he wants death, understanding that his friends aren't simply a disappointment. Eliphaz has gone beyond being a disappointment to throwing some shade at Job's dead kids. And that adds insult to injury in a way that makes it pretty obvious to me that Job probably can't be blamed for wanting to check out at this point and simply asking God to kill him. But even, as we said, at this moment of distress, Job's going to keep his wits about him, and he's going to turn back to answer Eliphaz in a way that once again demonstrates more wisdom in Job's misery than Eliphaz has in his relative position of comfort, sitting there and wagging his finger at Job. And so Job is going to realize this about Eliphaz. No matter what we understand about the truth in what he's saying, he's shown up with what seems to be ill motives. And Job's going to catch on to that in verse 14, where he says, he who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. And if a man has strayed in his heart from God, you can probably start to question whether or not his logic is on point as well. Quite possibly meaning that no matter how much scripture he might be quoting or teaching, the lack of human decency is a red flag that he might be quoting it or teaching it wrong. Once again, going back to that warning that God has given us through the apostle to teachers, that those of us who teach are under a stricter judgment, understanding that the greatest commandment summed up by Jesus was not know a lot of stuff. It was love God with all, and the second being like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And so Job has picked up on a red flag that is not going to lead him to debate his friend on scriptural points, but he is going to once again demonstrate his wisdom in cutting through all of the verbiage, the shade, and the accusations to ask him some simple questions. Did I call you here to bail me out of a difficult situation? No, you showed up here to offer some comfort. I wasn't in the kind of situation that demanded your salvation. And maybe moreover, Job, seeing that Eliphaz's complaint against him was rich in accusations but poor on facts, simply says, okay, since I'm suffering the outcome of the wicked, go ahead and remind me of what sin it was that I committed again. And since my words are so offensive, go ahead and remind me of what I said that was untrue. And even though I firmly believe that none of us is yet perfected in God, this reminded me of why Peter suggested that we take this advice seriously in 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning around verse 15, where he says, for this is the will of God, that by doing good, you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. So my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that we allow God to develop our character more and more so that fewer and fewer areas of our life are open to legitimate criticism, so that those who might try to chip away at the truth of our character, more and more are simply silenced by the facts.